So as we always do, I'll start off with some updates on things in the news that are relevant to results as advocacy on global poverty issues. So firstly, we noticed that a few of you reported receiving letters from MPs very late, sometimes over 3 months late after you initially sent them. I think in one case as well, the MP asked if the constituent wanted their concerns passed on to the minister, which had already been explicitly asked in the letter. And this obviously very much kind of limits the impact of the letter, and is concerning if it were to become a trend, obviously, because our actions are very timely and rely on a quick response. I think the constituents concerned in this case will be following up, and I believe kind of cleverly tying the initial concern that they wrote about to a later policy ask. I think in this case, they're going to tie the first issue, which was our November action on gender inequality, to last month's action pressing the Foreign Secretary to fund the Global Partnership for Education, or the GPE, which is obviously highly related to this concern. I hope not, but I wonder if anyone else has experienced something similar to this in recent months.
Yes, I said that was I was one of those, and I sent the letter in through the
That was you,
website.
Richard.
Yeah, yeah, that was certainly 3 or 4 months, I think.
Yeah, that's really not very good. So I hope that they have you sent in your follow-up letter?
Uh, I can't remember. I think he did say that he had referred it across, but I hadn't had a reply from the minister, so that's another issue, I
Okay.
suppose, which you normally expect.
I hope that's a slightly more kind of speedy process. But yeah, just do let us know if you feel like you're getting very late responses, because that would be important for us to know. Kathy.
Just to say that I haven't actually pursued it yet, but I should do because I realize now that I haven't had responses to things that I ought to, that was especially asking for urgent
Okay.
responses. And I will now take a note that I will follow that up.
Thank you, Kathy. Yeah, that would be great. And yeah, just keep us in the loop and let us know if there's anything that Naveed or I can help you with on that matter as well.
I had a reply from the government and from my MP about the ODA, the earlier action. Um, and after discussion with Naveed and Jill and Corinne, I sent a follow up to the MP of his letter, and he's replied again. So I've now had two letters on ODA from my MP. One of them kind of generic and a little bit out of focus. The second one much more on point, and it seems like he's getting his teeth into ODA, which is great. It's what we're about.
That's great to hear. Thank you, Peter. So good kind of persistence. To kind of continue back to the news kind of update section, as we mentioned in last month's call, political turmoil, including the war in the Middle East, have been affecting the global economy and particularly the global south. This includes, but it's not limited to, the increasing oil prices faced by many across the world and its knock-on impact on commodity prices, particularly where, as in lower middle income countries, alternative supply routes or stockpiling measures are simply not available. It's very sad to see the situation from last month continuing without resolution. Next, I wanted to mention that last week, for World Immunization Week, which runs every year from the 24th to the 30th of April, so it kind of ran from Friday to the following Thursday, Results organised a parliamentary event aiming at increasing resolve among MPs and peers to get active as polio champions.
Mm.
This, sorry, Pete.
No,
Oh, sorry.
no, I just grunted in assent.
Okay.
I'll turn off my mic.
One of the great grunts. Um, this this is really a really important time to focus on polio. because the UK government's recent decision to stop all of its direct funding for polio eradication back in April. So it was a really timely event to remind MPs and peers of the importance of polio and becoming polio champions, and it was a really successful event in Parliament. To reach out further than just those who attended the event, we produced a series of 4 videos that went on our Instagram featuring our resident polio expert, Tanya Chinawaita. And in these, Tanya breaks down the technical issues involved in the life cycle of a vaccine. I'm going to include the link to each of these in the chat box. And if you do have an account on Instagram, please do give us a follow and share our content. It's really important and a really important and valuable way for us to reach new people and increase our campaigning capabilities. So I'm just sharing these in the chat box now. Lastly, on this section of the call, I think we already reported 2 major publications by results last month. The first, a report by the All-Party Parliamentary Group on rising TB rates here in the UK, which we hope to ask for your support on promoting in the next couple of months. As always, a link to the report itself is going in the chat box now. The other very significant publication is the long-awaited Trading Hunger report. It's perfect timing because Sunit's just turned up, but this highlights the links between illicit financial flows and undernutrition. Illicit financial flows, or IFFs, deprive lower income countries of much needed financial resources that can be allocated towards their health and nutrition budgets. I know that there's a lot of you that have been waiting for this, and I'm very pleased to say that Sunit is going to be our guest speaker on the call this evening to take us through it. And we will loop back to that later. I'm putting in the chat here both a link to the full report and our action materials, what we're hoping to achieve through promoting it. There we go. So now that's the end of my spiel, and I'll be introducing our speaker for tonight. So Sunit Bagree, who is the Senior Policy Advocacy Consultant on Nutrition and the author of the Trading Hunger report, which I've shared in the chat box already. And therefore, Sunit is the perfect person to inform our campaigning on this topic this month. Sunit has been a really prolific author in recent years, publishing a 3-part series on the good news in nutrition that we were able to share with policymakers, and also in 2024, the report Bad Loans, Poor Nutrition. That was a very significant contribution to sector-wide advocacy on the rising debt crisis faced by many lower-income countries. Sunit, a very big welcome to this Grassroots conference call. Thank you so much for joining us. As you know, you're joining grassroots advocates from right around the UK who take regular campaign actions in their local constituencies, many of whom have been taking actions on global development issues for many years and have a great track record of advocacy success on issues like health and nutrition. The format will be slightly different this month, as Sunit has prepared a presentation for us rather than expecting us to take pre-arranged questions. Sunit will speak for about 15 to 20 minutes before I open to the usual questions from the floor. Before we get into that, though, Sunit, I wonder if you might want to say a little bit about yourself and some of the advocacy roles you took on before joining Results.
I think I know everyone, or virtually everyone, on the call. But in case there is anyone on the call who doesn't know me, hello, my name's Sunit. And until the end of last year, I was the Senior Policy Advocacy Officer for Results UK, leading on nutrition policy and also a lot of financing for development policy. This year, I have been a consultant for the organisation, and at the end of June, the consultancy will come to an end, and I'll be taking a little bit of time off and then starting a new role with Health Poverty Action in October, focusing on global public investments. And in terms of my background, I've been working in the sector for over 20 years. mainly with campaigning NGOs, but also for a couple of universities and a foundation. I'm delighted to present some of the key findings from my new report, Trading Hunger: How Tackling Illicit Financial Flows Can Help to Overcome Child Undernutrition. I should say that, like my work on debt justice, the arguments I make in relation to tackling illicit finance are relevant to all social sectors, not just nutrition. This is fundamentally about boosting the domestic financial resources available to Global South governments to invest in all public services. I just happen to anchor my report in nutrition. So I'm going to focus on illicit financial flows this evening, but let me just say two things about nutrition. First, the prevalence of wasting, that is low weight for height, has barely changed in recent years, while the prevalence of stunting, that is low height for age, has actually increased. And second, as we demonstrated in our Good News on Nutrition series of briefings that Will mentioned earlier, extremely cost-effective nutrition interventions are well established. So let me move on to illicit finance. Let's start with some definitions. The UN defines illicit financial flows as financial flows that are illicit in origin, transfer, or use, that reflect an exchange of value, and that cross country borders. In my new report, I focus on trade-related illicit financial flows, which are generated through a practice known as trade misinvoicing. Trade misinvoicing involves the deliberate falsification of the value, volume, and/or type of commodity in an international commercial transaction of goods or services by at least one party to the transaction. By fraudulently manipulating the price, quantity, or quality of a good or service on an invoice, malign actors can easily and quickly shift substantial sums of money across international borders. The proceeds of trade misinvoicing tend to be diverted to tax havens via secrecy jurisdictions. So secrecy jurisdictions and tax havens are often the same thing, but they are useful to separate for analytical purposes. The term secrecy jurisdiction emphasizes how a territory encourages the relocation of otherwise foreign economic and financial transactions through strong privacy protection rules. The term tax haven emphasizes how a territory imposes very low or even zero tax rates on foreign investors. The major players in this world of secrecy jurisdictions and tax havens are global north countries. For example, the UK in effect controls a major network of secrecy jurisdictions and tax havens, notably the 3 Crown dependencies and the 14 overseas territories. So my research estimates that the countries most affected by child undernutrition experienced at least $309.8 billion in trade-related illicit financial flows in 2024. This is a conservative estimate for 3 reasons. 1, because there is no data for some countries. 2, because only misinvoicing of trade in primary products and goods is covered, not misinvoicing of trade in services. And 3, the methodology that is the basis for my calculations does not pick up certain forms of trade misinvoicing, such as those relating to informal money transfer systems. A percentage of the entire $309.8 billion could be taxed, and the funds used to overcome child undernutrition in line with the SDGs and human rights if this trade were actually legitimate. Indeed, my research conservatively estimates that the government revenue losses from trade-related illicit financial flows amount to 86.3% of India's and 65.1% of Nigeria's domestically funded public health spending in 2023, respectively. So what should the UK government do? my report calls for action across 5 broad areas. First, the UK should support Global South countries in creating and strengthening laws and regulations targeting trade misinvoicing and other sources of illicit financial flows. Unfortunately, many Global South countries have inadequate rules and procedures in this sphere. Actors that engage in trade misinvoicing must face appropriate legal sanctions, which can also act as a deterrent to others. However, it's very important that laws and regulations to counter illicit finance are themselves rooted in laws and policies that protect whistleblowers and civil society investigators, whether they be journalists or academics or campaigners like us. Second, the UK should invest in increasing the capacity and coordination of customs, tax, financial intelligence, and law enforcement authorities in Global South countries, and play a leadership role in stopping professional enablers and recovering stolen assets. I'll take each of those bits in turn. Conducting joint training and risk assessments, for example, can build capacity across these authorities and support more collaborative and cohesive approaches. This is especially important in relation to high-risk areas, for example, free trade zones, sectors, for example, extractives such as oil and precious metals, and actors, for example, professional enablers such as lawyers, accountants, and estate agents, and others that facilitate illicit finance. So building the capacity and coordination of these authorities would help to reduce incidents of trade misinvoicing. It would also help to increase the recovery and repatriation of illicit assets. At the same time, I explain in the report how the UK must massively improve its own record when it comes to stopping professional enablers, again, those lawyers, accountants, estate agents, and others that facilitate illicit finance. The UK must improve its own record when it comes to stopping these professional enablers, and also its own record when it comes to recovering and ensuring the repatriation of stolen assets. Third, the UK should promote automatic exchange of comprehensive trade and tax information in ways that work for all Global South countries. Let's take the trade and tax elements one at a time. In regard to trade, distributed ledger technology, for example, blockchain, can enable the full digitalization and seamless electronic exchange of all trade information, including valuation data, securely across borders, thereby allowing customs officials to accurately evaluate invoices. In regard to tax, HM Revenue and Customs should publish information on foreign account holders from all countries. At the moment, HMRC only publishes information on foreign account holders from countries that implement the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development's burdensome standards on the automatic exchange of financial account information between governments. This means tax authorities in countries that don't have the capacity to meet OECD standards cannot check whether their taxpayers' reporting aligns with UK records. Fourth, the UK should force the British Overseas Territories and Crown dependencies to publish comprehensive public registers of beneficial ownership and advocate for a public global register that identifies all assets along with their beneficial owners in an open data format. Beneficial ownership is about who the real human beings are that ultimately own and control and profit from corporate vehicles. Despite promising greater transparency, most of these jurisdictions, so the British Overseas Territories and Crown dependencies, most of them have done nothing. For example, by the third deadline of June 2025, imposed by the UK Parliament on the country's 14 overseas territories, only Gibraltar and Montserrat had established such registers. It is truly bizarre that ministers continue to call for the other overseas territories to establish these registers while simultaneously defending their blatant lack of progress. And we see a similar, albeit slightly different, thing with the Crown dependencies, where ministers are stating that their position is that Crown dependencies should publish these public registers of beneficial ownership, but then ignore or even at times sort of excuse their lack of progress. So the fifth pillar of the 5 that I mentioned is that the UK should support a UN framework convention on international tax cooperation. We'll call it a UN tax treaty, along with a UN coordination and oversight mechanism on illicit finance. Again, let's take these one at a time. In regard to tax, the UK was one of only 9 states, just one of 9, to vote against the UN General Assembly resolution initiating negotiations for a UN tax treaty. This treaty could see a legitimate and rights-based entity replace the inequitable and ineffective OECD Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development as the premier global body for tax. It is essential that ministers reverse their position. It's a great shame and a great stain on our country. In regard to illicit finance, the UK is uncritical of the Financial Action Task Force, a powerful intergovernmental organisation focusing on money laundering and terrorist financing. Unfortunately, the FATF, as it's known, is unrepresentative of Global South countries and thus unresponsive to their challenges. FATF Financial Action Task Force standards have actually been weaponised by some governments to attack human rights. The FATF has also failed to tackle illicit financial flows in high-income countries. As the UK currently holds the FATF vice presidency and will soon hold the presidency, it is well placed to address these concerns. But the UK should go further and support recommendations made by prominent African Union and UN panels to have the UN at the heart of decision-making when it comes to illicit financial flows. So to conclude, if Global South countries could be empowered to tackle trade-related illicit financial flows and other illicit financial flows, they could invest more in public services, including vital child nutrition interventions that we know work in practice at relatively low cost. And properly tackling illicit financial flows would also generate huge sums for the UK, which could be invested in public services here at home. And that is before even considering the broader benefits of combating illicit finance, from enhancing financial stability to increasing trust in politics to weakening criminals and despots, benefits that improve the security of all nations. So thank you very much for your attention. I'm happy to take any questions and for us to have a wider discussion.
Thank you, Sunit, for that really helpful kind of in-depth information about illicit financial flow and their complexities. Yeah, I feel like there are going to be lots of questions. So if you'd like to either raise your hand as Richard has done or write them in the chat box, and I can get through them. So let's start with Richard, then Kathy, then Peter. And I'm just aware of the time. So if,
I'll be quick as I can. Well, Sunit, thank you so much. It's absolutely appalling, appalling, appalling. And this, of course, is nothing new. And these protectorates are British protectorates. So we protect them. We as taxpayers, we protect them on all if they're invaded. Why is it allowed? I mean, it's like saying Cornwall suddenly said it's a British protectorate, it has all this tax scale. Why can't these companies presume it? Why aren't they named and shamed? Because there must be auditors who check these things. These accountants, solicitors, estate agents. There was a program on Channel 4 about exactly this with estate agents in London, and nothing ever happened with illicit money coming from Russia at the time. But why aren't they named and shamed? Sorry, that's just me starting, but don't get me going because I'll be on all night. Thank you for your wonderful report.
Will, are we going to take one at a time, or would you like to do a few and then?
Let's do it one at a time,
okay.
And then we can just see time-wise.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, thank you very much for that. I think that it's important to recognise that in terms of their constitutional position, the overseas territories and crown dependencies have some differences between them, i.e. overseas territories and crown dependencies are different, and also different to other parts of the UK. But ultimately, yes, they are dependent on the UK for security, as you said. They also, ultimately report to a UK-based entity, whether that's the government, more in the case of the overseas territories, and the king in the case of the crown dependencies. And I would say the key issue here, though, is that obviously, having different levels of self-governance is all well and good, but there's no argument for self-governance that means that you have the right to endanger the security, and I mean security in the broader sense of the term, of people around the world. And I say security in the broader sense of the term, I'm taking sort of a human security approach here, which includes sort of traditional, if you like, physical and territorial security, but goes well beyond that and actually looks at individuals and groups and freedom from fear, freedom of want, and the degree of empowerment that they enjoy. And obviously, as I say, by stealing, effectively tax revenues, so facilitating the theft of these tax revenues, you're harming human security, but you are also, as I said in my presentation, endangering more traditional, if you like, physical territorial security, because criminals and despots thrive thanks to illicit finance. So that's another really important point. I think in terms of I've seen, I'm not actually fully able to read the chat, by the way, Will, so let me know if anything comes up in there that I should be aware of. But I did, I think, see what Jill put up, and it's just the last part of this. There's two parts. One is that aggressive tax avoidance is also an illicit financial flow, not something I cover in my report, but because the overall architecture of secrecy and theft is common to all different types of illicit financial flow, there is that sort of important commonality and overlap. And I think there have been campaigns shaming corporate actors who dodge taxes. We could definitely use more of them, but I think there certainly have been. And the last one, why are they able to get away with it? Well, that's the that's the golden question, isn't it? I mean, I think it can only be because it serves elite interests. Because I mean, there are literally no downsides, for people in general, broadly, to tackle illicit finance. It's a win-win-win-win-win across the board. The only people who will be harmed are, like I say, the criminals and despots, and then those companies and other entities who want to dodge taxes. That literally are the only people who will benefit. So I think it must be because either politicians or those close to them or those with great influence over them do not want it to happen, and that's why I think this is allowed to persist.
Thank you, Sunit. Yeah, that's a great answer. And Kathy, can we come to your question and then we can.
Great. I do think it follows on actually, because obviously what we've been hearing is that there is a huge advantage to certain unscrupulous or worse groups of people around the world who are making great amounts of cash through these illicit financial funds. And what I'm interested in is how personally do you feel endangered by sticking your head above the parapet to actually present the case and to say what is going on? Because there must be quite a lot of people who do not want this to come out of the sort of muddle of all the sort of financial world that we don't really follow, and there's lots of stuff. So, Sunit, do you feel that you're personally in danger of being shut down, closed, your arguments being taken off? Could you just give us a little clue as to how you feel about being the spokesperson for this?
Yeah, no fear. And I'm very proud, Kathy. I would say that I think that in broad terms, we still have the right to criticise power in this country. And I mean, obviously there are situations where I think you could argue that the space for dissent has been squeezed. One of the first things I did professionally in this sector back in 2003 was looking at the impacts of the war on terror, so-called, on humanitarian and development work. And I think we definitely saw a closing of civil society space in richer countries as well as poorer countries in that time, and I think it's in certain ways that has continued. But I still think, in broad terms, we are still free and safe to speak out against injustice and to criticise power. I should say, though, that we can't take that for granted, and I am very concerned about whether that will still be the case, in the future. And I think just look at America, where there are real challenges that different civil society voices, whether they're journalists or campaigners or whoever, face for the government there. So I think that, we need to be very wary, but I don't think we are in a situation where we need to fear at this point in time. I should say, finally, though, in the case study, in the report rather, I have an in-depth case study on Nigeria. So please do read that if you get the chance. And I also mention other countries. Bangladesh is a good one because actually there's evidence that the UK was used as a destination for illicit finance, using trade misinvoicing as well, specifically by the former regime of Sheikh Hasina, authoritarian regime of Sheikh Hasina in Bangladesh, I would say. So I mean, I would just say that colleagues of ours in countries such as the two I just mentioned, but others. I recently did an interview with the New Humanitarian, and Myanmar and Sudan came up, and how illicit finance has fueled wars in both of those countries. I think colleagues in countries such as the ones I've just mentioned and others definitely do face serious risks and threats if they speak out about these issues. So I think they're the ones we should be most concerned about in this sense, and showing solidarity with. Thank you.
Sunit. And thank you, Kathy, for your question. Right, we've got probably 3 minutes, so we'll do Peter's in the chat and then Karen's, if that's okay. So Peter, would you like to go ahead and read out your question?
Sure. My concern is what we will be pushing against if we're campaigning specifically on tax havens, which is my biggest beef. What I need to understand is, why does the government continue to protect them? What is in the government's interest? In other words, what is their financial interest in maintaining the tax havens?
Yeah, thanks, Peter. I think I tried to answer that question before. The only reason I can think is that if you think about the huge sums of money that we would raise in the UK for spending on public services by tackling illicit finance and reclaiming those stolen tax revenues, if you think about how huge the impacts are, on poorer countries, and when you think beyond, the benefits in terms of reclaiming, this money that's rightfully ours and the people's of the world, public money, and all the other benefits that I mentioned, from trust in politics to harming despots and criminals to, and there's others I didn't mention, obviously upholding the rule of law and so on and so forth. There's so many. It's a no-brainer, and so therefore, the only reason I can think of, and I have discussed this with a number of experts, and obviously I've read quite a lot about this subject, but I've not heard a more persuasive case than the reason being that some of our, leaders and or some of the people very close to them, so friends of theirs, allies of theirs, and or people who influence them. So that's either, you know, people who they admire or people that they fear, or maybe a bit of both. These interest groups, some combination of those interest groups I just mentioned, generate a disincentive to take the action that is so clearly needed and would have such huge benefits as we've just been discussing. So I can't say I know that, you know, for a fact, because I'm not there. I'm not, you know, walking in the shadow of ministers all the time. I'm not, you know, monitoring their emails and phone calls and so on and so forth. And the same for different different politicians and business leaders and so on and so forth. But that is what I suspect, because I cannot think of, you know, another reason. What, you know, why else would the government, you know, do this? And final thing I'll say on this, it's really interesting that the government took illicit finance a bit more seriously after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And, you know, a sort of plethora of research coming out showing how those close to the Kremlin had used, you know, London in particular, but also obviously using some of the Crown dependencies and overseas territories as conduits for you know, stashing ill-gotten gains. But even then, taking it a bit more seriously, they've not really, you know, you'd think because of the very real security threat posed by you know, Putin's leadership, that yeah, that would be a strong incentive, but not sufficiently.
So
yeah.
I'm just going to. Can I quickly squeeze in Karen and Ricky's question?
Oh yeah, so that was it basically. I can't think of another reason why else they would, you know, why else they wouldn't do it. So yeah.
Thank you for that. And finally, very, very quickly, sorry, Karen.
Yeah, yes. It was just because I looked at the government briefing that there was a press release rather that there was a link to in the materials, and it talked about the financial summit being main purpose to protect the UK from drugs and crime. It didn't mention anything about it being beneficial to the developing world at all. Now, so I wondered whether we should focus on the benefits to the UK or the benefits to global South countries from losing the tax, regaining the tax money in our letters. Because it certainly looks from the government press release that they're just interested in the effects on the UK.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. I think that you know, the FCDO is the lead agency for on behalf of the UK government for the summit. So it is meant to be something that benefits all countries, not just the UK. That's important to say. But I do think that, you know, your concerns are very well founded. I think that I've been quite heavily involved with the process to develop non-papers, as they're called, by the FCDO for the summit. And generally, a lot of them are inoffensive, but they don't really go to the heart of issues. And you know, in some instances, actually, we could argue that they're harmful. So to give you probably the best example of that is that one of the papers focuses on giving loans to poorer countries to recover assets. And as we know from some of the previous work I've done and the work that many others have done, you know, much of the global South is facing a debt crisis. So giving them loans for asset recovery is not the way to go. They should be grants, but if they are going to be loans, they shouldn't have to be repaid unless, you know, significant sums are indeed recovered. Otherwise, you could just be making debt crises worse. So, and in terms of your final bit, I do think that our role is to talk about, you know, we're internationalists, we're talking about international development and global justice issues. So I think that we need to, you know, focus on that aspect. So the benefits for poorer countries. But I absolutely think that we should also make the point that this is also completely in the interest of the UK as well, for the reasons that we've discussed. So I think that should definitely be part of the, you know, the framing and the communication. But the focus should be on the benefits, you know, for poorer countries, because that's really, you know, that's what we prioritize. That's what we focus on. Thanks.
Thank you, Sunit. And thank you everyone for your questions. And sorry that we ran slightly over time. So yeah, thank you so much for that, both for your kind of presentation and those very detailed and really fantastic answers to the questions. If people are able to write to the relevant government ministers on this very important topic, with really serious consequences, that would be very, very much welcomed. And all the information that you need, hopefully, is in the action materials, which I have shared in the most recent message in the chat, and will obviously be shared in the comment section of the YouTube video when we put it on record, and also our website. So if there's anything you've missed in the chat, do keep an eye out on the website. And yes, and of course, if you do submit your action, please do let us know, and then obviously just let us know how you get on, because it's really appreciated. And that's kind of it for tonight. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you, Sunit, for writing a fantastic report and for speaking about it. I will keep this call open, probably not for the full half an hour as Naveed normally does, because I need to eat some spaghetti. But for a few minutes, so people can have a bit more of an informal chat. But thank you very much, everyone, for coming.